All right. Hello, travelers. Welcome back to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're sharing free live stream discussions with some of our active virtual exchange travelers all around the world. You can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, I'm very excited to be connecting with Phoebe Durand-McDonnell, a musician and Fulbright researcher who's living and conducting her research in Geneva, Switzerland. Phoebe's virtual exchange is open to any student who wants to follow her experiences in Switzerland, and we'll add a link to her journey homepage on the Reach the World site in the chat bar to the right of your screen. This will be the first of two opportunities to connect live with Phoebe and ask her questions. And during today's live stream, I'd strongly encourage you to use the chat bar and let us know you're here. Share any questions you have for Phoebe, and we'll have a fun discussion. So we'll get to as many questions as we can. And without any sort of further delay, I'm ready to travel to Switzerland. If you are, welcome, Phoebe.
Hello.
Hey, welcome. Do you want to start by just introducing us and telling us who you are and what you're doing and how you got there?
Sure thing. My name is Phoebe, and I am in Switzerland, Geneva. It's a beautiful day outside right now, but it was raining so hard earlier. I have a harp. I'm a musician. And before I studied in Switzerland, I was at school in Ohio. And before that, I went and studied harp in Boston. And I lived in Maine on Mount Desert Island, which is a tiny island off the coast in the very northeast part of Maine. And I started on a really small harp called a Celtic harp. And then I moved to classical harp and modern harp and played in orchestras. And that's what I got my degree in at Oberlin in Ohio. And then while I was at Oberlin, I found a Baroque harp, so a harp modeled after an instrument from the 1500s. And I just was so interested. I'd never seen a harp like that before. And I got really into playing it. And there's no teachers in the US for Baroque harp. They teach sometimes at festivals, but never at schools. And there's one teacher I met who gave a masterclass at Oberlin, and she teaches in Geneva. And I said, okay, well, I have to study with her. So I applied for Fulbright. I wrote out a big research proposal about why I couldn't do this research in the US. And I got the Fulbright, and now I'm here.
Wow. Is that a Baroque harp to your side?
This is a Baroque harp, yes.
What makes it a Baroque harp versus, I don't know, if there's a normal harp, a regular harp?
A modern harp, let's call it.
Modern harp, all right.
So a modern harp has one row of strings, and it has 7 pedals to change keys. So if you want a note to go higher or lower, you move a pedal. And before they had that technology, they had these harps, and this harp has 3 parallel rows of strings. So the outer 2 rows are tuned, it's the same way, and the inside row is the higher and lower notes, the sharps and flats.
Wow. Wow, I want to get back into your music for sure a little bit later in this call, and I'm hoping we can coax you to play something for us. It's just sitting there like waiting to be played. But I want to talk about your time in Switzerland so far. You said that you came to Switzerland because of this unique opportunity to learn more about this particular instrument. How long have you been in Geneva, and what has your time there been like so far?
I've been in Geneva since September. I went home briefly for Christmas, but came right back. And I'm in a master's degree program. So I'm in school, I'm taking classes, and it's been absolutely incredible. The students at the school are from all over the world. It's really something that I've never experienced before. and I went to a really interesting school in the US. So there were international students, but not nearly as much as here. And Geneva's a really beautiful city. It's so old and it's so interesting to just walk around and see everything and learn all the history. And especially playing the music that I play, which is from hundreds of years ago. It's really cool to be in Europe where that music was being written and was actually performed at the time that it was composed.
What was your journey like to Switzerland? Did you fly from Maine, from your home in Maine? Or what does that look like for someone who's never been to Switzerland? How do you get there?
How do you get there? I flew out of Boston. So loaded all my stuff into a car, drove 6 hours to the Boston airport with my mom. And she came with me. She was here for the first 2 weeks just to sort of get me settled in. And we flew from Boston to Iceland, then to Geneva. And it was a crazy journey, but we got here and suddenly it sort of hadn't seemed real, and then everything was in French. And there were people sort of traveling without instruments, which I was surprised by as I was coming to music school. And usually when I travel, there are people with instruments. And so it was sort of like, oh, I'm not doing this as a tour. I'm not doing this to play music, like just on a one-off concert. I'm going to live here. And it was really, really shocking. And I sort of should have been expecting it, the culture shock, but it's like a hard thing to just jump into. So then got to the airport, figured out how to get to where I live, which is sort of, there's like the city of Geneva is a modern city, and then up on a hill in the middle of it is the old town. And I live in the old town. And so you're sort of a modern airport through a normal looking city, and then suddenly you're surrounded by cobblestones and ancient stone buildings. And yeah, it was fun, but it was shocking. Yeah.
What was one of the things that took you the longest to get used to?
I would say, yes, French. That was a lot. But where I live is right across from the Cathedral Saint-Pierre, which is in the center of Geneva. It's like what the city was built around. And the bells, they have sort of a long song that they play on every hour before they chime the hour. And the song is a Swiss folk song, and it changes every month. And then the bells also ring every 15 minutes, all day, every day. If there are church services, it also rings for 15 minutes continuously, just sort of clanging and clanging. It was really hard to get used to. I would wake up at 3 a.m, like, what's going on? Oh, it's 3 o'clock. Like, that's just the bells.
Is that how you know when a new month has arrived, when the song changes?
It is. I was doing homework last night until midnight, and the song changed because it was then May 1st.
Exciting.
Okay.
Have you discovered any particular foods that may be popular in Switzerland that you've enjoyed?
So many good foods. The Swiss are very proud of their cheese and their chocolate, and with good reason. Cheese, there are so many different types, and they're all named after different places that they were sort of invented and are made. And so there's just constant, like, people have fondue all the time, which seems so fancy to me, but it's just like a normal thing. I think my favorite thing is called a roasty, and it's basically just shredded potato with a lot of cheese and spices, and you fry it up like a pancake, and you have it with eggs. It's so good.
That sounds really good. For people who may not know what fondue is, can you describe what Swiss fondue is?
Yeah, it's as much cheese as you could possibly want in one meal. It's a giant pot of melted cheese, and you have chunks of bread, and you have really long skewers, and you skewer the bread and just dip it in the cheese and eat it. It's so simple and it's so good.
Sounds like the perfect meal to me. How, prior to being more or less confined to your apartment during the COVID-19 pandemic, how would you get around the city of Geneva?
The city of Geneva is fairly small for a city, and I could walk to my school. Sort of, it's a 5-minute walk. It was super easy. And could walk to any grocery store I needed to. There's a giant farmer's market that I went to every Sunday. If I needed to go somewhere and I had to bring a harp, or it was snowing or raining, there's trams and buses, and it's a really good system. There's no underground trains, which I was sort of surprised by. I'm used to having that in cities.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a question I was trying so hard to wait until later to ask, but how did you travel with your harp? And when you have to travel with your harp, how do you do that?
Yes. I did not travel with my harp, fortunately. I don't have a Baroque harp of my own. So this is the school harp. And I have all of the school harps with me. They closed the school and my teacher called me and said, you have to get the harps out of there, please. So I took them on the tram generally. And if you need to go somewhere further, there's always the trains. They're used to people bringing bikes and skis and stuff.
Yeah.
The harp looks impressive enough that people are like, oh, okay, here, let me help you.
It looks really heavy though. It's
a little bit heavy. There's not very much to it. It's hollow wood and string.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, good. I got the answer to my burning question. You mentioned prior to our call that you have had a chance to explore places outside of Geneva and Switzerland as well. Do you have one or more favorite places that you want to share with our audience? And before you answer, I just want to make sure everyone on the live stream is thinking about questions you might have. We can share them with Phoebe at any point. I'm happy to ask my questions too, but I'd be even happier to share yours. So if you have something you want to ask Phoebe, be sure to leave it in the chat bar.
Places I've been. My favorite place was the top of a mountain called Schilthorn, and it was on a weekend trip that I went with. All of the Fulbrighters in Switzerland had a meeting at the embassy in Bern, which is the capital of Switzerland. And we decided to just make a fun trip out of it. So we got a little rental house in a place called Interlaken, which means sort of between the lakes, and it was between the lakes. And then we took a train to Grindelwald, which is like the bad wizard in Harry Potter. That's where his name comes from. And you're sort of up in the Alps, and it's beautiful weather, and then you hike a little ways, and it's freezing cold and snowing and sleeting, and you go back down, and it's beautiful weather, and you take off all your layers. And then we went from Grindelwald up, and we used our same train tickets, and we took gondolas, which are sort of enclosed pods on cables. And we took 5 of them, and we just kept going up and up and up into these little mountain villages. And finally we got to the top of a mountain in the Alps, and it was freezing cold and snowing all over the place. It was a glacier. We were looking across at all of the Alps and all of the other glaciers, and it was just so cool. It's where they filmed, the buildings where they filmed a James Bond movie, famously.
All right. Yeah, well, you're kind of in a unique position to answer this because you grew up in the Northeast, United States, where there are mountains for sure. How do you compare the Alps as mountains to the mountains that some of our viewers in the Northeast might be familiar with, in New England, or the Rockies in Colorado? How do they compare?
They're huge. They're really huge. I've never been to the Rockies, so I can't answer that. They're much bigger than anything in northeast of North America. I hear stories about like Julius Caesar bringing his troops over the Alps from Italy, and I'm just baffled because they're enormous, and they go on, and there's like the pre-Alps, which are smaller, but they're still huge, and they're pointed and have snow and glaciers everywhere. And then there's the actual Alps, and then there's the French Alps, and then it's just a line of mountains that seems pretty impassable, and they're just breathtaking, so beautiful.
Sounds really nice. I'm wondering if you have, in the months that you've spent in Switzerland, have had a chance, maybe beyond Fondue, to experience anything that could be considered a tradition or part of Swiss culture that you'd want to share.
Yeah, I came to Switzerland not entirely sure what to think about like Swiss stereotypes of loving chocolate and fondue and cheese and everything and hiking. It's all true. I have confirmed that. And the thing that I think is sort of the essence of Switzerland that I've found is if you're hiking anywhere, even just a little ways out of a city, you're hearing cowbells. And if you think like the Heidi book, where she's sort of up in the mountains with her goats and they all have bells, you can just hear them from everywhere. And it was really like, I know that they've had cowbells on cows, raising them in Switzerland for hundreds of years probably. And it was just so interesting to experience that and be like, oh, this is everyday life for so many people. And I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, how interesting. I know that you are sort of stuck in your apartment right now, at least for the short term. Lots of people are spending this time envisioning where they want to go as soon as they're free to roam again. Do you have some places that you'd like to explore as soon as you're able?
Everywhere. For sure. There's the place that I had been planning on going is another trip to the Alps where they have natural hot springs in a glacier. I'd love to do that. And honestly, just anything outside of this building would be great. But hiking anywhere, really.
Hiking, yeah. It sounds like you've caught the hiking bug.
For sure.
Are there, speaking of just the fact that you're right in the middle of Europe right now and you have such a particular interest in music and music history, are there other places within Europe that are music hotspots or classical or Baroque music hotspots that are of interest to you?
Yeah, there's, sort of everywhere. There's definitely so many Baroque composers who lived and died in Germany, which is fairly close. Switzerland shares a large border with Germany. Italy, of course, all of Italy, so much Italian opera and sort of all these things that you think are so fancy, but really are like, that's sort of the center. That's where it all came from. Mm-hmm. There was a famous harp concerto that was written for this type of harp, which is sort of a big solo in front of an orchestra, written by Handel, and while he was living in England. And my aunt lives in London, actually, so I'm sort of plotting my way to go find the handwritten music that Handel left there. I know it's in the British Library, I just have to go there.
So cool. It's like a musical treasure hunt around Europe. I can imagine there's an endless list of places to go.
Exactly.
I want to ask you one more question, and maybe you'd be willing to play for us for a little bit.
Sure.
Awesome. The living abroad in a place like Switzerland, or living abroad anywhere really, takes, it's a big leap of faith. It's a big, source of excitement and anticipation for anyone, especially if you haven't had an experience like that before. Was there anything that you were nervous about before you left to live in Switzerland, that and how did that play out?
Let's see. I was definitely nervous about living on my own. I haven't done that very much. I had a really, really nice roommate all through my undergrad years. And so it was, even if I was like alone in my room, she was still very close. So living alone and trying to get around and not knowing the language. I didn't know French before I got here. And there are 4 national languages of Switzerland. And so everything is written in French and also one of these other languages, usually German. So even simple things like trying to figure out, you're like, okay, I know I'm supposed to get off at this place of this tram stop, but I don't actually know how it's pronounced because it's not written that way. It's pronounced so differently. Sort of, I was nervous about really just getting lost, which has happened a couple of times, but it's always fine.
Do you get a chance to just sort of speak bits of French, and how is that coming along? What's it like to slowly pick up a language like that by living immersed in it?
It was really challenging. I probably could have learned a little bit more over the summer before I came here, and I just didn't. I was focused on other things, music. All of my classes are in French. And so music history and music in general can be a really complicated subject and really complicated things to understand, even in your first language. And so it was not easy. And I think by about November, I was understanding most of what was going on in class, and that was good. And when I go to the farmer's market or the stores, I will speak in French, and they generally understand me. A lot of people do speak English because Geneva is a really international city, and French isn't the first language of a lot of people here. So there's always that backfall where you're sort of like, okay, I'll try in English and we'll see what happens. And usually it works. But the classes were really, that's a struggle for sure.
Did you it seems like with music, with sheet music, written music, it's all a common language in and of itself, with some exceptions. Did you find that was a good way to connect with some of the other international students who are there and may not share a first language as you?
Definitely. And people always say music is the universal language, and I hadn't quite understood that until I got here. And the first week we didn't have like an orientation because we don't really have a campus to sort of walk around and find all the buildings. It's one building. And so our orientation was improvisation, and we were sort of split up into groups depending on what era of music we were playing or what our instruments could do. And my group had several people, and the languages were, I was the only English speaker. The languages were Spanish, Italian, French, Greek, and German. And it was all of our first weeks here. The non-French speakers we were all equally lost. And so there was one student who was really good at French and also spoke Italian. And sort of the leader, the conductor, the teacher, was Italian, and he didn't speak French very well. And so it was sort of an interesting mix of, he would speak Italian and the student would translate it into French and Spanish because he was from Mexico. And then a different person would translate it from Spanish to English. And it was very complicated until we started playing music, and then we all understood each other.
Yeah, how cool. What a good anecdote. I would love for you to play some music if you would feel comfortable doing that. I feel like we've kept our viewers waiting, and this is what they really want to hear.
Sure. So I'll play a piece from the 1500s, and it's called it's a style of music called a chacona, which is a type of dance.
Fantastic. Wow, that was awesome. Just mesmerizing.
Thank you.
So cool. It's so cool to see you playing from this angle too, because you can really see your fingers moving on the strings.
Yeah.
Very, very impressive. Thank you so much. I think that we're just about out of time for today. Our viewers are holding on to their questions for next time. I want to direct them to your amazing ongoing virtual exchange on the Reach the World platform. We have a link in the chat to the right of the screen. Please log on, check out some of the great articles that Phoebe's writing from Geneva. She's going to give us more details about her everyday life in Geneva. And it's just a great way to learn about a different place. This has been such a fun half an hour talking to you, Phoebe. I really appreciate you joining us. I want to thank our whole live stream audience for joining us today too. We'll check in again with Phoebe in a couple weeks. And if you're looking for more virtual exchange, video calls and live streams, we have a whole schedule of events at home.reachtheworld.org. So one last time, thank you so much, Phoebe. I hope you have a great weekend in Geneva, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you.